show me as I want to be seen. So I think some of you have not seen the show yet. I strongly recommend it. It's a delightful exhibit. It's about gender identity, but it's also about claiming the self. How you might see yourself in your more interior landscape, your more private moment, and then maybe actually be having the courage to sort of show that to the world, because it doesn't always match what we walk around in, how we actually see ourselves. And I thought that was a really beautiful, a beautiful context. The curator did a fantastic job of selecting various artists who had different takes on that claiming of identity. One of the artists that you'll see a lot if you go to the exhibit is an African artist who, Mohali, I'm probably butchering the name, who claims this blackness in a way, this photographic work, and she makes her, somehow in the process of the photograph, she makes her skin even blacker, and there's always a very confrontational gaze of like, I'm going to make you look at this, I'm going to make you face your own fear of it, your own judgment of, am I too black, or does black scare you? It's really, really wonderful work. So who do we aspire to be, and are we willing to show that? I mean, that is what I got from the work, and it's really what I've tried to do for the last however many years with my own work, you know, to show the bolder self, the defiant self, the queer self, the self that is different, that doesn't fit into mainstream. There's a lot of deviation from the mainstream in the show. There's a wonderful quote, again, another name I'm not going to get right, by Rabbi Benai Lappi, I'll say. What it means to be queer is to embody a profound sense of otherness. To embody a profound sense of otherness. I think I'm going to talk a little bit about gender in dance here in a moment, but that has kind of been a guiding light for me to embody that profound sense of otherness. The insights from which you walk through the world as a critique on the mainstream. So your body walking through the world, be it a queer body, a trans body, a disabled body, an old body, a body of color, that is a critique on the mainstream, just walking down the street. It's a critique. And so you're walking around in that critique, and the show, it really shows that beautifully. I thought Claude, the primary artist, you know, who's very androgynous, and a lot of the pictures of sort of a thin body that dressed as a male often. But then there are moments where she looks like a model, you know, like a fashion model. So the shape-shifting, the kind of acknowledgement that gender identity and just identity is changing. It's not fixed. And we're going through life, you know, in this mutable way, moving from one identity to the other. But I want to talk about the gendered body in dance, because every little girl, well, I guess the assumption is that every little girl dreams of being a ballerina, a delicate, floaty fairy in a tutu. But what happens when you transgress that? If you're a little girl who doesn't want to be a fairy, or if you're a little boy who does want to be a fairy, who wants to be in the tutu, who wants to be delicate and beautiful and ephemeral and transcendent and light. These are problematic kind of situations. And you know, growing up, I've been dancing since I was 7. I'm now 68, so that's a long time. And always have had to push against this idea that, you know, when I was in New York City at the beginning of my career, I'm a tall person, I'm a large person, 6'4". I think I've shrunk a little bit, I'm 6'3" now. But 6'4", and you know, I could count to 8, so I had rhythm. So back in the day, this is in the 70s, mind you, you know, I was like, oh my God, here's a tall boy who can count to 8. We're gonna hire him. I had a commodity that I could offer. But I was always in the back row with the tallest girl, lifting her and moving her from one spot to another. So I didn't get to be the pliant, vulnerable, expressive, delicate figure in the front. And I had a hard time with that. It's like, wait, this is not a true expression of who I am, being the stalwart kind of male icon, the paragon of uprightness and immobility, implacability, I should say. That really wasn't my identity. It wasn't how I saw myself in my private moment, to go back to that. So anyway, I came to San Francisco in the early 80s, 79, 80, and I was very disenchanted with dance because of its kind of really gendered, narrowly gendered way of being. And I was also frustrated that the great choreographers of our time, who were famously homosexual, and I won't mention any names, Merce Cunningham, Paul Taylor, Jerome Robbins, you know, it wasn't in their work. The work was still this kind of male-female paradigm, you know, even in the abstract work of, you know, some of the contemporary people. It retained that same point of view, and it just felt like such a shameful thing to me. Why are we hiding? Why are we not expressing who we really are? Is it so unacceptable that it can't be named or shown? And I was really looking for something different. So I came to San Francisco, the mecca of the LGBTQ community, thinking I was going to find queer dance. And what I found was, you know, beefcake in silver lame jockstraps waving a rainbow flag. And I thought, well, that's not very layered. That's not expressing all the levels of identity that I would like to get to. And it doesn't say much about me. So I was a little disappointed with that. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and make work that allows me to be who I really am and talk about who I really am, and also breaks down these kind of gender roles as much as possible. So that was a big goal for me. You know, put the boys in front and let them be soft and vulnerable, and let the ladies be strong. Let them be butch, even if they want to be. So another response that I had to the exhibit, which I just loved, was there is a methodology of difference. It's not just the subject matter, but it's actually, the subject matter actually affects how you make what you make. So I come from a generation where dance was a mute art form. And you were expected to make, you know, architectural shapes and be pretty passive in your face, very unexpressive, and just let the movement speak. Nothing wrong with that. It was an important cycle to go through. We learned a lot from it, but I was done with it I left New York. I was like, well, why can't I speak? Human beings speak. And my impression of most of the dances that I saw was, who are these people? Are they just bendy bodies, shiny little Barbie dolls that bend and twist? Who are they? What do they think about? What do they care about? Where do they come from? What is their history? What are their problems? And I always felt unsatisfied that element was missing. And for me, language was a way to get there. I became, well, I should also add in that it was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. An enormous amount of my friends died, and I was surrounded in this kind of culture of death. And I thought, oh my God, are we still not going to speak about who we are? And I had no desire to make the act up, angry kind of work. I wanted to actually talk about death. It is inevitable. It is going to happen. And how do we feel about it? How do we deal with it? What place does it have in our consciousness? And I felt like I needed to speak to do that. So I also felt like dance didn't necessarily have to happen on the stage, that I could do it in someone's bathroom or in the alleyway behind the theater. Was that perhaps a more telling and vital context for dance rather than just having it appear on the stage? These ideas are everywhere now, but at the time they were just starting to arise. I think also, getting back to the methodology that I was taught was you try to make the body this paragon of skill and beauty and facility and able to do a million things. But I thought, well, isn't it also important to show the body as a territory of vulnerability and complication and hesitation and fear, and the body is expressive of all of those things, and those things are not necessarily going to fit into the codified ways that we're trained to jump and turn and lift the leg high and all of that. So what do I need to access physically to get to the complication and the vulnerability, which is the part that interests me, still the part that interests me. And then what about adding to those vulnerable kind of positions that are expressive of meekness or weakness or decay? What about adding to them guttural sounds or some kind of intoning or chanting? Those were kind of the things that I started off with. Somehow I came around to humor, which is, again, I think in the gay culture, there's a lot of gallows humor, and certainly there was during the AIDS era. And I thought, how can I bring humor into the work in a way that is not cartoonish, but actually expressive of my own sense of irony, my own cynicism about the mainstream culture, and that was a great joy for me when I discovered that. I made a very important piece in my development called 29 Effeminate Gestures, and it was a funny piece largely, but it really made you look at gesture and what it means to be, trapped in one idea of how to be male or how to be a certain gender. How am I doing on time, Cecile? I don't want to overshoot.
We have till about 1.
Okay.
And then just a little bit of time for questions.
Okay. So what has happened to me over the years is, I think it first started, I just wanted to excavate my own identity because I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to find the layers and the complication, and so the work had maybe sort of a confessional quality to it of I'm going to show that I'm vulnerable and that I make mistakes and that I'm clumsy and that I'm not a paragon of beauty or skill, and laugh at that and let other people laugh with me, laughing at our humanity, at our enormous capacity for making mistakes and getting things wrong. But eventually it set me on a path of thinking deeply about people in the margins, about people who are ill, people who are old, people who are mentally unstable or, God forbid, poor, people out of the mainstream. How do we look at them? How do we maybe perceive them in a more complete way instead of the simple label that we tend to put on them? Basically trying to give them a fuller kind of presence, more humanity in the way that they are presented. So a lot of my work has been about that over the years, and I think you see that in the show too, which I love. Those people who I've worked a lot with people with disabilities, for instance. Those people are the salt of the earth, and I think they put us in touch with our humanity and the kind of real issues of living and dying, and how tenuous it all is, that we live on this cusp of sanity and insanity. Most of us do, I certainly do, of being solvent and being on the streets, of being healthy, or, oh, God forbid, that one thing happens and you're not healthy anymore. I mean, we all live on this knife's edge, and to pretend that it doesn't exist just seems ridiculous to me. So I've gotten to the point where when I look at people who stand in the inner circle and bask in the sunshine of wealth and health and the mainstream, I'm a little repulsed by it. I'm a little like, what? It's a myth. You're just like the rest of us. You're standing on the knife's edge. You just don't know it yet. So that, I do want to mention, because I'm going to run out of time, that the show we're doing on Thursday is this work that we do with veterans. And, I'm a gay guy from San Francisco who didn't serve in the military. What on earth right do I have to speak for or with veterans? It came to me, is all I can say. I was doing this work where I was asking my friends and my kind of immediate community these hard questions about, when have you fallen down? When has life really kind of collapsed and broken down and you've just been at the edge, or maybe even in despair, and what caused that, and how did you deal with it? You're still here, so you must have dealt with it in some way. Everybody had a story. Everybody had an answer. And it sounds depressing, but people love talking about that stuff, about their divorce and their addictions and their, financial collapse and their losing the house. And I mean, people love talking about it. And actually, it occurred to me as I listened carefully that they were really stories of resilience. They were really stories about how tenacious we are to hold on to life and to keep going. And that we make it through these things. We come back. We may come back differently than we were before, but we come back. And so I think that was just really inspiring to me. And I was doing this series of works based on the actual words. My work has a lot of words. It's dance, so it has a lot of words. But usually I write those words, and these works were the words of the people. So I was taking the interviews, transcribing them, and using this actual language, and it was just so delicious, so powerful and poetic and profound, and better than I could have written. And a friend of mine who's a curator in Kansas, of all places, who I've known for many years, she saw one of these, we were calling it the Humankind series, and she saw one of the installations of the series, and she was like, oh, you have to come to Kansas and work with our veterans, because I live in this community that is a lot of young veterans who are going off to these many wars and coming home with serious disability, brain injury and PTSD and amputation and all sorts of really, really hard things. And they want to tell their stories, and we want them to feel integrated. She was a curator at a big museum. And I said, well, that's not really me. I can't speak to veterans because that would be false. And she said, well, come and talk to them, hear their stories, no pressure. There was a ton of pressure, but I went, I heard the stories. The stories were amazing. And in this particular instance, the veterans were so young. And I had this paternal reaction. These could be my kids. They were 25, 28, and they'd served in the military, and they'd experienced horrible injury and in combat and mental injury. And so I just felt I need to get out of my own way, because if I can be useful, if they really want to tell these stories, which they did, and they tell them anonymously, and they're not in the work. It's the dancers kind of rubbing up against this language with movement and with sound and with song. And then we did it for the veterans and their families. We interviewed the families as well. And they came, and it was just this amazing, visceral experience for all of us. They saw things in their words. They kind of saw their own depth, their own humanity, and it was really, really beautiful and powerful, and I think healing, if I dare say that word. So now I've been doing it for several years. I've done it all over the country with all different sorts of vets, and we just did it here, thanks to Cecile, with vets at the 7th Street Clinic and
Downtown, VA
yeah.
Clinic.
VA Clinic, yeah. So hopefully you'll come see that. And I've filled my time, exactly 1 o'clock. We should probably let you go. Thank you. Thank you for coming.